Okay, this is in the Siddur, in the insert in the prayer book, any prayer book that you have, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, during the week or on Shabbat, when you get to the Shmona Esrei, which is pretty much the highlight of your Shachrit, Mincha, or Mariv service, there's going to be an insert for the 8 days of Hanukkah and for the 1 day of Purim in your Siddur. Everyone has different Siddurs, so it's hard for me to say what page in your Siddur, but if you would look at the table of contents, at any Shmona Esrei, any prayer, Shachos, Mincha, Mariv, in the Shmona Esrei, you'll have an insert for the holidays of Hanukkah and Purim. This is not said, this page, at the beginning of the service or before the Shema. It's always in the Shmona Esrei at the highlight, to the extent that the cantor, when he does the repetition of the Amidah, he also will be inserting this, will be reading this insert that's in your prayer book. So let's take a look what it says for Purim, which is, we're just doing the English right now. So this is the insert, this text over here for Purim, and I'm going to read. In the days of Mordechai and Esther, in Shushan, the capital. So let's say once upon a time, Rome was the capital of Italy, or Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. So Shushan was the capital of Persia, whatever Persia was in those days. When the wicked Haman rose up against them is referring to the Jews, and sought to destroy. He wanted to destroy all the Jews. So in the days of Mordechai and Esther, in the capital of Shushan, there was this wicked Haman. This was the Satan. This is the dark devil. And he wanted to slaughter all the Jews, slaughter and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, infants and the women, in 1 day, on the 13th day of the 12th month. That's Yud Gimel Adar. That's the 13th day of the 12th month. Adar here is considered the 12th month because in some versions of our biblical calendar, Nisan, the month of Aries, which is Passover, is considered month number 1. We don't really follow that. We follow the system, the biblical calendar, of course, but we really typically will do Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, as the first month. But in many of the Jewish scriptures, Nisan, the month of Passover, is the first month. And the reason why we did that, even though we don't really follow that today, but why there's a system of Nisan being the first month, because that's when the Jews came out of Egypt. And they came out in Nisan, and that was basically when they became a Jewish people and a Jewish nation. So many scriptures will always refer to Nisan as month number 1, and so on and so forth. So here as well in the Siddur, we're calling the month prior to Nisan, which is Adar, the 12th month. So it's the 13th day of the 12th month. That's the 13th of Adar. And to take their spoil for plunder. So basically, Haman, the wicked, wanted to completely annihilate and destroy everything, kill the Jews, basically. But you, that's a capital Y, but you, God, in your abounding mercies, capital Y, foiled his counsel, referring to Haman, and frustrated his intention, and caused the evil he planned, just trying to get this here, on his own head, and they hanged him and his sons upon the gallows. So that really, in short, is the whole story of Purim. The Jews were living peacefully, like always, live and let live, just leave us alone. Leave us alone in Israel, leave us alone in Turkey, leave us alone in Iraq. And that never seems to happen. And the Haman came, or Ahmadinejad came to Iran, and they always have the local Haman of its time trying to destroy the Jewish people. The difference with Purim and Hanukkah, it's very important to make this distinction, because this is not the first and last time that people wanted to destroy the Jews. We have the story of Hanukkah, where the Greeks wanted to destroy the Jews, or the Romans wanted to destroy the Jews. If you think about this, so many times the Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust, why is it that we've chosen Hanukkah and Purim as the arch holidays and miracles, to the extent that we inserted it into the prayer book? Because these two holidays, cardinals, Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2. You're always going to have in our history, as a Jewish historian, if you're a historian, even if you're not a historian, you just like to know about your history and your stories of the Jewish people, you're always going to have people that either want to leave us alone and let us live in peace, but they just don't want you to believe in God and be Jewish. So they're okay with you living. They're okay with coexisting with you. They're okay with you working 9 to 5. They just don't want you to be too Jewish. They're just uncomfortable with you looking different, speaking different, whether it's speaking Yiddish or Hebrew or wearing a yarmulke or tzitzis or lighting candles. They want to be your friend, but just what's the business with the mezuzah? They just don't want too Jewish. That was the story of Hanukkah. The Greeks had no problem with the Jews during the Second Temple era for them to continue to exist and to live. The Greeks, who were tremendous philosophers, theologians, they were okay with Jews living and existing and being married and having children and everything. The Jewish people wanted to go to the local parks and be members of their local LA fitness club. They were okay with that. They just didn't want you to be too Jewish. They didn't want you to follow Jewish holidays. They didn't want you to do circumcision. They didn't want you to keep the Shabbat. And they said, if you just look and act like us, we'll leave you alone. And that is the story of Hanukkah. So the opposition on the Jewish people was not a physical opposition. They didn't want Jewish blood. They just wanted the soul. They wanted to destroy the soul of the Jewish people, where you can't practice Judaism. Just look like us, act like us. And that's also what happened, by the way, during the Spanish Inquisition. The Spaniards had no issue with Jews in Spain living. They just didn't want them to be Jewish. Just be and look and talk like us and kiss the same cross we do. You're just as good. That's the story of Hanukkah. And there's so many other stories that happened throughout the course of 2,000 years, but it all stems back from the same arch opposition, like the Greeks were to Judaism. And the miracle of Hanukkah was that Jews were, no, we're not only going to be living in this country, but we're going to be Jewish living in this country. And then you had the whole fight of the weak against the many, the poor against the rich, and that's the whole story of Hanukkah. Purim, on the other hand, was a very different type of miracle, and it was a very different type of opposition. The villain was much more different than the Greeks. The villain in the Purim, which is coming up in a few weeks, was Haman. And what did we just read in the prayer book? We just quoted a chapter verse by verse over there. Haman didn't care at all about the soul of the Jew. Let's go back to the text. When the wicked Haman rose up against them and sought to destroy, slaughter, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, infants and women, in one day. All Haman cared about was to wipe out the Jewish people. Haman had no interest in having a theological discussion with the Jews. Who do you believe in? Do you believe in monotheism? Do you believe in Trinity? That wasn't Haman's concern. If you had Jewish blood, you were going to be annihilated. Women and children. Hitler did the same thing. Hitler did not care if you converted to Christianity, even though he wasn't a Christian, but whatever religion he belonged, but it was no issue to him. He was not going to have a discussion with the Jew. You know, if you don't keep Shabbat and you take the mezuzah off your front door, then you're okay. We'll let you in. That was of no consequence to Nazi Germany. If you had Jewish blood going back 3 or 4 generations, whatever it was, like Haman, he wanted to annihilate them. That was the villain of Purim, which was Haman. He wanted to annihilate the Jewish people. He wanted Jewish blood. Whereas the story of Hanukkah was not about that at all. The Greeks did not want to annihilate the Jewish people. They wanted to annihilate the soul of the Jewish people. They wanted to knock out the holidays and Shabbat and circumcision. And if you don't have a mezuzah on your front door and you don't do circumcision and you don't follow the Shabbat, what did the Greeks say to the Jewish people? We'll let you be. We'll leave you alone. So many times when you have anti-Semites, even today, you have to at least ask yourself, what are they fighting? What are they in opposition to? Sometimes it's both. So the story of Hanukkah, the anti-Semitism then was on the soul and the practice of Judaism, like the Spaniards during the Spanish Inquisition. And Purim was a physical annihilation and genocide of the Jewish people. They didn't care who was Orthodox, who was Reform, and who was Reconstructionist. It made no difference to Haman. You can say as much as you want, but I don't practice Judaism. It didn't matter to Haman. The same way it didn't matter to the Nazis. I don't care how much pork you ate on Yom Kippur, but to Nazis, if your mother was, even your father was Jewish, then you're out. So it's important to make that distinction, Purim and Hanukkah, and that's why those 2 holidays are in the prayer book, and only those 2 holidays, because all other villains in our Jewish history will either stem from one of those 2. Is it a Purim anti-Semitism, a Purim oppression on the Jewish people, or is it a Hanukkah oppression, a Hanukkah type of anti-Semitism on the Jewish people? Okay. Now, for the story of Hanukkah, we have, of course, remember the miracle, and as a result of the miracle, with the miracle of Hanukkah, with the 8 days that last the Hanukkah menorah, we came back, we fought, we won the war, and we had the whole story of Hanukkah. We liked the menorah. The miracle of Purim was a bit different. We didn't have that kind of miracle of whatever, the sword, the dirt turning into swords like in biblical times, or we had anything lighting for 8 days. On the contrary, we know that Queen Esther had to fast for 3 days leading up to the great meeting between her and her uncle Mordechai and Haman. They did a lot of prep. They even asked the Jewish people to fast and to pray. And there's different things that got Ahasuerus, the king, upset with Haman, and then the advisors used it as an opportunity to get Haman and the children hung on the gallows, as we just read in the Siddur. But it wasn't like, some cloud or some fire came from the sky and burnt Haman or something. Everything was played out on the political stage. So it was almost, of course, it was a miracle, but it was played out play by play. Whereas Hanukkah, there was really bizarre miracles with the menorah lasting for 8 days instead of 1, and having an army of 3,000 people beating an army of 3 million people in Hanukkah. So it was a whole different ballgame. And as a result of the miracle of Purim, or some people will say, not necessarily is it a miracle, but the development and the political maneuvering as to Haman being hung, and then Queen Esther being the ultimate favorite to Ahasuerus, and now she's the new boss in town, the queen. As a result, Esther wrote these diaries. Queen Esther wrote these diaries, and she asked for the people to relive this story of Purim. Now, she wasn't self-centered, Queen Esther. She was a big tzaddik, and she had tremendous faith in God and everything else, and she knew this was a great... The idea of her requesting that the Jewish people read the Megillah, her diaries, and they should read it every year, is so that you and I can reenact and relive this history and kind of go through these motions of the anti-Semitism of our time. Is it a spiritual anti-Semitism like Hanukkah, or is it Purim? It's never to lose sight of Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, the two main oppressions or villains or Satans that are always out there lurking to find the wonderful opportunity to chop and get the Jewish people. I don't want to get into politics today, but there's this new type of anti-Semitism, which is stating now, we're not against the Jew, we're only against Zionism. Very clever type of anti-Semitism today. Very, very tricky. And again, it's almost embarrassing to call this politics because I was just in Israel 2 weeks ago, but that is the new form where you can have an Ahmadinejad, literally just in our time, say, I want to wipe Israel off the face of the map, but I'm not an anti-Semite. I just don't like Israel. Okay, these are clever people. So this is the idea of reliving and reenacting the Megillah and rereading it. And luckily, even though Jews always argue and can never agree, but thankfully everyone agreed to Queen Esther and they said, you know what? She's right. We should read the Megillah and read her diaries. Imagine Mendel Schwartz had a very interesting trip one day. I wrote my diaries and I got the whole world, everybody, and of all religious backgrounds say, you know what, Mendel, we're going to read your diaries in every temple around the world. I mean, that's a big, big deal. So Queen Esther was successful in that front. Let us share my screen because we're going to do the next page from the Rambam, who asks us in 2022 what we should be doing on the holiday of Purim. So let me open up here. Rambam. Okay, can you see my screen here, Sylvia? My home screen, my computer screen here? It's hard to see it, right? Okay. All right, you see my mouse here, chapter 1?
Yes.
Okay. It is a positive mitzvah. This is chapter 1, halacha 1. It is a positive mitzvah ordained by the rabbis, which means it is not ordained in the Bible. It's not like thou shalt keep kosher. It's ordained by the rabbis. This is the Maimonides who's writing this. Maimonides says it is a positive or mitzvah ordained by the rabbis to read the Megillah at the appointed time. It is well known that this was ordained by the prophets. So Maimonides is adding, it's not just a mitzvah by the rabbis, but it was also ordained by the prophets, which gives a little bit more strength to the mitzvah of reading the Megillah, more than, let's say, the Yarmulke, or more than lighting Shabbat candles, which the rabbis asked us to do as a mitzvah. But this is more than the Rambam, the Maimonides is telling us, also ordained by the prophets. Next paragraph. Everyone is obligated in this reading, men, women, converts, slaves, everyone has to read from the Megillah. Nobody is exempt. Children should also be trained to read from the Megillah. Even the priests, the Kohanim, should neglect their service in the temple and the Beit HaMikdash and come to hear the reading of the Megillah. That's how important the Megillah is. Similarly, Torah study should be neglected. In other words, if you're even studying in the yeshiva, and we know studying is the most highest form of a mitzvah, says Maimonides, you should neglect your Torah study, leave the yeshiva, and go to temple to hear the reading of the Megillah. And surely this applies to other mitzvot of the Torah. Because generally speaking, there's a rule, if I'm involved in one mitzvah, I'm exempted from another mitzvah. If I'm putting on tefillin, I'm exempted from whatever it is. If I'm at a funeral, I'm doing a mitzvah, going to a funeral, I'm exempt from putting on tefillin right now, or going to a minyan, let's say. But here the Rambam says Megillah is so powerful that you even need to neglect your Torah study to go to the temple. And okay, let's see some of the commentators on the bottom, the commentaries on the bottom. Let's see where it says, it is well known that this was ordained by the prophets. You see my mouse? It is well known that this was ordained by the prophets. So in Talmud Megillah 2a states that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, the court convened by Ezra. Again, we're talking now during the beginning of the Second Temple era. So this is right after the miracle of Purim, which was between the First and Second Temple. So when the Jewish people went back to Jerusalem to rebuild the second temple, that's what we call the men of the Great Assembly. This court convened by Ezra, who was the Jewish Moses of the time, and he established all the norms of the Jewish practice after their return to Zion, to Israel, were the ones who ordained the reading of the Megillah. And that's why Maimonides added the words also by the prophets, because it wasn't just rabbis like in Talmud study, there were different rabbis. But Ezra, who was a prophet, who was the leader of the time, who was part of this men of the Great Assembly, he also stated that, yes, we, the Jewish people, should read from the Megillah on Purim. That body of the men of the Great Assembly included several prophets. Haggai was part of the men of the Great Assembly. Zechariah, Malachi. These were many prophets besides rabbis who were part of this parliament. Just so you know, Israel, its first parliament was not in 1948. Its first parliament was the beginning of the Second Temple, which was roughly 350 BCE. And we know the members of the parliament, which were some of these prophets. Give me 1 minute. Okay. The Jerusalem Talmud states that 85 sages, including more than 30 prophets, ratified Esther's request that the reading of the Megillah be accepted as an annual obligation. Could you imagine that? There's 100, you can't get today in Congress anything more than a 55% vote. It's always split. And you have one person this way, one person that way, just collapsing the whole thing. Here you have 85 sages and more than 30 prophets. That's quite, so I guess we see a few people abstained, possibly. But this is a very large majority of Jewish people saying that, yes, we are going to read Queen Esther's Megillah as an annual obligation. Commenting on Esther, which is chapter 9 in the book of Esther, which we were going to read from the Megillah, chapter 9, verse 27, listen to what Esther wrote. They confirmed and they accepted upon themselves. So that's what she wrote in the Megillah, even before they really confirmed it. It's almost like prophecy. She wrote that. They confirmed and they accept upon themselves that we're going to read the Megillah. So the Talmud states and comments that when Esther wrote they, she's referring to the heavenly court confirmed what they, the sages, accepted upon themselves. It's fascinating. So the heavenly court agreed, the spiritual heavenly court agreed what the sages in this first parliament stated, that yes, we the Jewish people should read all the time, the Megillah every year. Now it says, let's skip one. Let's do this. Everyone is obligated to this reading. Although a person can fulfill his or her obligation by listening to a reading from another person, the obligation is to read the Megillah. So it's important for us to know, even though you don't know how to read the Megillah, and we go to temple, most of us, 99.9% of us go to temple, and we listen to the one person read the Megillah, but we should know that the mitzvah is to read it, not to listen to it. Because we don't know how to read from the Megillah, it's okay, you're also allowed to listen to the Megillah. So me too, I'm not a very good person, I'm not a good reader from the Megillah without the vowels. Sometimes I do it, but I'm breaking my teeth a bit. So the mitzvah is to read it. But again, if you can't read it, at least listen to it. Note the contrast to the mitzvah of hearing the blowing of the shofar. By Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah is not to blow the shofar. The mitzvah is to listen to the shofar. On Purim, the mitzvah is to read the Megillah, not to listen to the Megillah. It's just, this is more academics over here, Talmudic scholarly people picking up on these nuances of Maimonides when it says everyone is obligated in the reading of the Megillah, as opposed to the shofar. The mitzvah is not the blowing of the shofar, but listening to the shofar. And here Maimonides does something unique, and he says men and women are obligated to listen or to read from the Megillah. Now we know there's a general rule that women are exempt from time-bound mitzvahs. Why do mitzvahs, ladies don't have to wear tefillin? Because the mitzvah of tefillin is during the day, not at night. So there's a general structure in Judaism that any positive commandment that is time bound, you could only do it in this time and not in that time, women are exempt. The men have to put on the tefillin, not the ladies. And there's two reasons for that. Why women are not obligated on time-bound mitzvot. Why? The two reasons are, one, because women already have a job of raising a family. And as we just studied earlier, if you're involved in one mitzvah, you're exempted from doing another mitzvah. So if the lady of the house is involved in raising children and education and everything else, so she's exempt from tefillin and everything else. But the Maimonides says, but this is one scenario where she's not exempt. She still has to listen to the Megillah. Just like men cannot, that's like we said earlier, men have to neglect themselves, neglect their Torah study and go and listen to the Megillah. Ladies have to neglect the mitzvah of raising a family and go and listen to the Megillah. So let's see what the commentaries say over here. Although women are generally free from the obligation to observe positive mitzvot that are associated with a specific time, an exemption is made with regard to this mitzvah. Why? Because they're also included in this miracle. Right? They were supposed to be annihilated, and now they're not annihilated. So that's a major point of celebration for the Jewish, for not just the Jewish people, but also for the ladies. So that is why we say that women also have to listen to the Megillah, and they are not exempt from this incredible mitzvah. Okay, so we discussed over here the distinction between Hanukkah and Purim. We discussed over here the difference of the Satan, of the opposition, the tension against the Jewish people. Is it on the physical body or on the soul of the Jew? And we discussed the mitzvah. The main mitzvah is listening to the Megillah. Queen Esther is the one that established it. The miracle, the miracle is that everyone is the miracle is that everyone in the parliament of the first Jewish parliament said, yes, we agree with Esther. Everyone should read this Megillah, including the prophets that were involved in that parliament. That's why this has more weight. We also explained that the Megillah is such a powerful mitzvah that even though typically when you're involved in a mitzvah, you're exempt from another mitzvah, but in the case of Purim, you're not. You have to stop your tefillin or finish your tefillin, or you have to stop your study of Torah and everything else, and you have to do the mitzvah of Megillah. And so too, ladies, even though typically they are not obligated to do time-bound mitzvot, they as well are obligated. Because the power of the Megillah is so powerful, just like we explained for the men as well, and that's why they have to stop studying. And also, as the commentator said at the bottom over there, that the ladies also were involved in the miracle. They were saved, so they should also give thanks and read this from this Megillah. And as far as someone chatted me, why is there no vowels? Most of the literature of the Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah, all these biblical books, including the Torah, never had vowels. So the Megillah is part of the 24 holy books of the Torah, and it doesn't either have vowels. In the prayer book, in the Siddur, we put in vowels for us smart Californians. We need vowels. But in the old days, they didn't have the vowels. Okay, so that's that. I just want to wrap it up with some interesting things. I have found this very cute pamphlet, and I just want to list maybe 10 unique things about Purim that you don't find in any other holiday. So you can take a pen and paper and write it down, just make some cliff notes. And I thought they were pretty good. Interesting, intriguing nuances that you find in the holiday of Purim that you will not find in any other holiday. And I will list here at least 10. Okay, here we go. All holidays have a Hebrew name. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year, or Pesach means to jump over, to pass over. Hanukkah means to rest. Every Jewish holiday is titled with a Hebrew name. Purim is the only Jewish holiday that is not a Hebrew name. It is a Persian name. Purim comes from the word pur, or P-U-R, pur, or P-O-O-R, pur, but it's in Hebrew, pei vav resh, which means a lottery. This was Haman's lottery of what day to kill the Jewish people. And we call this holiday Purim, which is a Persian name. It's the only Jewish holiday that its name is not a Jewish name. This is more like trivia we're doing right now. That's number one. Number two, all holidays are named for the miracle as to what occurred on that holiday. So for example, Passover is God passed over the Jewish homes and did not smite the firstborn. That's Pesach, Passover. Hanukkah, God rested and the Jewish people were able to make a Chanukah Tabayis on Hanukkah. And so the name given to the holiday encompasses and represents the miracle that took place on that holiday. Or Yom Kippur, that God finally atoned for the Jewish people on the golden calf and whatever it is. Purim, the name of the holiday, is the exact opposite of a miracle. Purim, which means lottery, was the highlight of when Haman was wanted to annihilate and murder the Jewish people. It's the exact opposite of what we're celebrating for Purim, which is the miracle that Haman was killed on the gallows, as we said in the prayer book just before, and that the Jews were not annihilated. We should call it freedom, baby, or exodus, whatever the case is. We call it Purim, which is the exact opposite of the miracle. That's number two. Number three, all holidays which have a miracle, like even Sukkot, which is the huts, or God covered us for 40 years and provided sustenance. A Passover, which is a wonderful holiday of the splitting of the sea and the plagues and everything else. These are all holidays which have a lot of miracles in them, and it's no wonder, and you don't got to convince anyone to commemorate this holiday because you really saw God expose himself like never before. Every holiday was full of miracles. But Purim is the only holiday that we're celebrating, and you don't quite see the miracle. I mean, it's incredible that the Jews were saved, but you don't see the miracle of really how they were saved. They fought. It was a tough battle. Haman was killed from some sideshow that happened between him and some other advisors that were jealous of him. I akin Purim to the miracle of the 6-day war, where the 6-day war, if you wear one pair of glasses like I do, I will say it's a miracle. The Jewish people were able to conquer basically Israel in 6 days is crazy. It's a miracle. But if you ask many people, especially if they don't believe in God, they will say it's not a miracle. Israel was better trained. They were strategically planning this invasion from 5 Arab countries, and they figured it out. They were just better trained soldiers than the Iraqi, whatever it is, than the Jordanians. So that's also what's happening on Purim. You have the option, if you want, to say there's no miracle here. The Jews won the war. Mordechai liked his wife Esther. She was a good-looking woman, and he favored her. And Queen Esther said, you know what? I want you to save my Jewish people and give them military arms and training. And Achashverosh listened to her. Big deal. So it can kind of be viewed both ways, Purim, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why the story of the Megillah doesn't have the name of God in there once. Or another reason why we have a mask. Why do we cover the mask? Because God covered himself. There are people that will say there is no miracle in Purim. Even the non-believer is unable to state that there was no miracle in the story of Passover. Even the non-believer is unable to state there was no miracle in the menorah lasting for 8 days and 8 nights. And Sukkot, with God protecting the Jewish people for 40 years, and so on and so forth. But Purim, there is room to believe or to not believe that God had a hand in this. So that is number 4, how Purim is distinct and different than all the other holidays. excuse me, that was number 3, right, Sylvia? Okay. Next one, number 4. Every holiday of all the Jewish holidays, everyone commemorates at the same time. Everyone on the 15th day of the month of Nisan will eat matzah. Everybody on the 10th day of Tishrei is fasting Yom Kippur. Purim is the only holiday where some people will celebrate it on the 14th and some people on Shushan Purim on the 15th. So my sister Hindel, for example, who lives in Jerusalem, she absolutely will not be celebrating Purim when the rest of Israel will be celebrating Purim. The Jews of Jerusalem celebrated on Shushan Purim, which is very unique than to any other holiday. Can you imagine some Jews around the world are going to eat matzah on Tuesday and other people can eat it on Wednesday? It's a non-starter. Another one, number 5, I think. 3, 4, 5, yeah. Let's skip that one. Purim is the only holiday where the hero is a female, Queen Esther, not Moses, not Joshua, not the high priests, and things like that. Another one is let's skip that one. On all other holidays, women, as we mentioned, ladies are exempt because it's a time-bound mitzvah, whereas Purim, ladies also have to listen to the Megillah just like the men. And we explained why before. The Kabbalah tells us that all holidays are going to be nullified when the Mashiach comes. Now, there's no reason to celebrate Hanukkah and talk about the miracle of the menorah lasting 8 days and 8 nights when we have miracles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner when Mashiach comes. But the Kabbalah tells us Purim, and I'm not sure why, it's going to continue even when Mashiach comes. Another distinction is all the holidays of the Jewish people all occur in Israel or during the temple times when the temple was standing. Or from the Bible, Purim is the only holiday, it was outside of Israel, and it was not when the temple was standing. So there's a certain uniqueness and there's a certain power that it has. And I'll just do one more. That's sort of the same, so we'll leave that alone. Another one is that all holidays we're asked not to work. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, even Hanukkah, we're asked to keep it more of a sanctified holy day. Whereas Purim, even though it has all this power to it, as we explained above, and all its distinctions, it's still a regular work day if you so choose to. There's no custom, we don't work. No, you could. We don't because it's only 24 hours. Might as well capitalize on it. Let me do one more. Every mitzvah, we're always told what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and whatever we're supposed to do, they tell us how much, like how much matzah to eat, and a half a matzah, a full matzah, or Hanukkah, it should light 35 minutes the candles, or 42 minutes, and only last 6 minutes. Purim, we have a mitzvah of on the opposite. Do whatever you want, drink as much as you want. We're not limited to 4 cups of wine. We're not limited just to a 2-course meal. Do whatever you want. Just be happy, knock yourself out. So we'll stop it at that. It's 8:15. I'm going to stop the record and